It's 11 at night, and you're not doing anything. Not really. You're sitting in the blue light of a laptop screen with 14 tabs open, an AI certification course, a LinkedIn learning path, a video titled Skills You'll Need by 2027, 3 more you don't even remember clicking. You tell yourself you're getting ahead. 3 hours later, you close the laptop, and you couldn't name one thing you actually learned. Just tired, and a strange, specific kind of guilty, the kind that comes from working hard at something that produced nothing. Somewhere in the apartment, a roommate's asleep, or a partner went to bed hours ago, and you're the only one still awake, lit up by a screen, doing something that looks, from the outside, exactly like effort. You're not lazy. You've never worked this hard in your life. This is not a story about laziness. This is not a story about discipline. This is not a story about willpower. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone else is doing the exact same thing you are, except their version of it doesn't look like course tabs. Theirs looks like a job search app, refreshed for the 40th time today, applying to postings he's not even sure he wants, just to feel like he's moving. And here's the strange part. 2 years ago, there wasn't a word for what he was doing. Now, there is. It went viral almost overnight. Thousands of people recognizing themselves in a single term, the way you just recognized yourself in those 14 tabs. But the person who came up with that word wasn't a psychologist, wasn't an economist, wasn't anyone who studies burnout for a living. It was an 8-year-old. She'd noticed her dad, recently laid off, spending hours a day inside a job app, and she named exactly what she saw in a way none of the adults around him had managed to. We'll get to her. Not yet. Because before we get to her, we need to understand what you and this stranger and thousands of other people scattered across different cities, different jobs, different versions of the same night actually have in common. It's not weakness. It's not a generational flaw. It's something happening underneath in the part of your brain that decides what counts as progress, colliding head-on with an economy that stopped rewarding effort the way it used to. Stay with me. This gets stranger before it gets clear. Let's go back to those 14 tabs for a second, because there's something worth noticing about what's actually happening there. You open a course. You save a link. You bookmark a certification program you'll get to this weekend. And each time you do it, something in you settles, just slightly, a small hit of relief like you've done something. Here's what most people miss. Opening a tab and finishing a skill are not the same action, but your brain is treating them like they are. The collecting feels like the accomplishing. You could close your laptop having bookmarked 6 new things and genuinely believe you're 6 things closer to being ready. For the layoff that hasn't happened yet, for the AI tool that might replace part of your job, for whatever version of enough keeps moving further away every time you get close to it. Now, picture David, 29, 4 jobs in 3 years. Ask him why he left the last one, and he'll give you the reasons everyone gives. The manager was disorganized, the pay didn't match the workload, the culture fell off. All true, probably, but there's a quieter reason underneath the one he says out loud, one he might not fully see himself. 4 straight hours of quiet, unrewarding spreadsheet work has started to feel almost physically unbearable. Not because the work is hard, because it's slow. Nothing pings, nothing refreshes, nothing tells him every few seconds that something new just happened. It's not that David can't focus. It's that focus, the old kind, long, quiet, unrewarded, has stopped being a thing his brain expects to be worth it. Look a little closer at David's last resignation, and the pattern gets even clearer. He didn't leave because he had another offer lined up. He handed in his notice first, then started applying, telling himself he'd figure it out in the 2 weeks before his last day. When a friend asked why he didn't wait until he had something solid, he laughed and said something like, "I just couldn't sit in that feeling anymore." Not the feeling of a bad job, the feeling of nothing changing. 4 jobs in 3 years isn't restlessness for its own sake. It's a body doing anything it can to avoid a specific low-grade dread, staying still long enough to notice the effort isn't adding up to anything. But it gets stranger, because somewhere else, in a different city, a father who just lost his job is doing something that looks completely different from David's job hopping and completely different from your 14 tabs. And it's actually the same thing wearing a different coat. He's applying, constantly, scrolling one job board, then another, submitting versions of the same resume to postings he barely reads all the way through. He feels busy. He feels exhausted at the end of it. And at the end of most days, he has no interview requests, no real leads, nothing to show, just the crash that comes after hours of feeling like you were doing something. His 8-year-old daughter is the one who noticed. She watched him do this day after day, and she gave it a name that, within days of showing up online, thousands of strangers recognized instantly, the way you might recognize it in yourself right now. Not because she studied psychology, because she was standing outside the loop, watching someone she loved be inside it. Here's the part nobody tells you. All three of these, the tabs, the job hopping, the scrolling, feel like effort because they cost real time and real energy. That's not fake. What's fake is the assumption, buried underneath all of it, that this particular kind of motion is the same thing as moving forward. So let's name the pattern out loud, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Wading Kools. Hopping jobs. Refreshing a job board at midnight. 3 different behaviors, 3 different lives. And underneath all of them, the exact same trade. Real effort spent on something that feels like progress but isn't measured in anything you can point to afterward. If you've caught yourself in even one of these, and be honest, you probably have, you're not broken. You're responding, in a completely understandable way, to something bigger than you. And the mechanism behind it is stranger than burnout, or laziness, or any of the usual words people reach for. There's one more thing you need before this makes full sense. So hit subscribe if you want the rest of this. Drop a comment with which one of the 3 you recognized in yourself. The tab hoarder, the job hopper, or the Doomjobber, and stay with me. Because what's actually happening in your brain and in the economy underneath it is about to get a lot clearer. Here's the first piece. Ask most people over 50 why younger workers seem to burn out so much faster, and you'll hear some version of the same theory. This generation just isn't tough. They grew up with everything handed to them. They can't sit still. They quit the second something gets hard. And look, that's not an unreasonable thing to believe. If you spent your 20s working through real material scarcity, tight money, physical labor, no safety net, then hard has a very specific shape in your mind. It looks like your hands, not your inbox. From that seat, watching someone struggle to sit through 4 quiet hours at a desk can genuinely look like softness. That belief isn't cruelty. It's just measuring a very real, very different kind of hardship against a scale built for a different economy. Picture her specifically, hands cracked from years of physical work, genuinely proud of never once calling in sick, watching her grandchild lie in bed at noon on a Saturday, and calling it, not unkindly, soft. She's not wrong about what she endured. She's just never had a reason to learn that exhaustion can come from a source with no physical shape at all. But here's the part that gets left out. The generational researcher Jean Twenge has spent years studying exactly this kind of gap, and her core finding cuts against both sides of the argument at once. Generations don't behave differently because their character is different. They behave differently because they're shaped by different shared conditions, what researchers call a cohort effect. The same way a fish raised in one current swims differently than a fish raised in another, without either one being weaker. And the current younger workers are swimming in right now is genuinely strange. A recent global survey by Deloitte, spanning tens of thousands of respondents across dozens of countries, found that roughly 3 out of 4 young workers now expect artificial intelligence to reshape their job within the next year, and, notably, most of them are already responding by teaching themselves new skills outside of work hours, unprompted, just to keep up. That's not laziness. That's a whole generation running a low-grade emergency drill, indefinitely, for a threat nobody can quite point to or plan around. Pay attention to this, because it explains the exhaustion underneath everything we've talked about so far. Recent workforce research puts Gen Z burnout at severe levels. Over 70% reporting moderate to severe burnout, and a significant share of workers in their early 20s actually taking time off specifically for stress-related reasons. Barely a third describe themselves as genuinely engaged at work. This isn't a small dip. This is close to a majority of an entire generation running on fumes, while still being told from the outside that they simply aren't trying hard enough. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the tab hoarding and the job hopping and the doomjobbing stop looking like separate personality quirks and start looking like the same math problem. There's a term economists use for part of this: credential inflation, when a qualification that used to be enough to get you in the door quietly stops being enough, so everyone has to keep stacking more just to stay level with where they already were. The old promise was simple: work hard, get the degree, get the job, keep the job. That promise hasn't just weakened. For a lot of people, it stopped paying out in any predictable way at all. Take Priya, 23 years old, marketing degree, graduated last year into a job market that looks nothing like the one her older cousin walked into 5 years earlier. The entry-level role she expected to land, the one that used to exist specifically to train new graduates on the job, doesn't really exist in the same shape anymore. A lot of what used to fill that role, drafting first-pass copy, running basic reports, scheduling, is now handled by an AI tool before a junior employee ever touches it. She isn't failing to get hired because she's unqualified. She's applying into a structure that's quietly disappearing underneath her. This isn't a guess. A recent analysis from the Burning Glass Institute, a research group that studies labor market data, found that recent graduates are facing rising unemployment and underemployment driven by structural change, not just a slow economy. The report even has a name for one piece of it: an expertise upheaval. Entry-level tasks disappearing not because young workers lack ability, but because the tasks themselves are quietly being automated out from under the job description. Separate research from the same institute found that roughly half of graduates holding only a bachelor's degree end up in a job that never actually required one in the first place. Put those two findings side by side, and you get the real shape of the promise breaking. It was never that young people stopped valuing education or stopped trying. It's that the deal they were promised, a degree gets you the entry job gets you experience gets you security, is being rewritten in real time, and mostly nobody sent out notice. And a system that stops paying out predictably does something very specific to the part of your brain that decides what's worth doing. It doesn't make you give up. It makes you search harder, more compulsively, for whatever small, unpredictable hit of relief you can still get your hands on: a new tab, a new application, a new refresh. Hold that thought, because what's happening in that exact moment, the moment right before you open one more tab, is not a character flaw. It's a mechanism, and it has a name. Here's the mechanism. Neuroscientist Nora Fokow, whose research on the brain's reward pathways has shaped how we understand craving and motivation, has shown something that applies here directly. The brain doesn't get hooked hardest on rewards that arrive reliably. It gets hooked hardest on rewards that arrive unpredictably, a maybe, not a certain. A new email might be good news. A new job posting might be the one. A new tab might contain the exact skill that saves you. The brain can't resist a maybe. It's built not to. This isn't a new discovery about phones or algorithms specifically. It's older than any app. It's the same wiring that makes a slot machine more compelling than a vending machine. Even though a vending machine guarantees you get exactly what you paid for, and a slot machine almost never does. Guaranteed outcomes settle the brain down. Uncertain outcomes light it up. For most of human history, that wiring served people well. It's what kept someone checking one more riverbank, one more field, when a full day's food wasn't guaranteed either way. The problem was never the wiring. The problem is what it's currently pointed at. And this is where it gets remarkable. Tab hoarding, job hopping, doomjobbing, three behaviors that look nothing alike on the surface, are all underneath the same brain running the same search for the same kind of maybe, because the thing that used to be a reliable yes, work hard, get higher, keep the job, get ahead, has quietly turned into a maybe too. The economy stopped paying out on schedule. So the brain, doing exactly what it's built to do, started checking more often, hoping to catch the next unpredictable payout. This is not a story about a weak generation. This is not a story about a lazy generation. This is not even really a story about a generation at all. It's a story about what happens to any brain, in any body, at any age, when the system it depends on stops keeping its promises on a schedule anyone can count on. Now, remember the father, the one refreshing the job board, applying to postings he's barely reading, feeling busy, and finishing each day with nothing to show for it. His 8-year-old daughter watched him do this for weeks. She didn't have a psychology degree. She didn't know the words variable reward or cohort effect. What she had was distance. She was standing just outside the loop, watching someone she loved be all the way inside it. And from that distance, she saw something the adults around him, including him, couldn't quite name. So she named it herself. And when that name made its way online, it didn't stay quiet. It spread fast, because thousands of people recognized, in one small phrase, the exact thing they'd been doing every night and hadn't had a word for either. That's the detail we open with. That's who named it. Not an economist, not a psychologist. A child standing on the outside, seeing clearly what's almost impossible to see from the inside. And here's what her outside view actually shows us, if we're willing to look at it the same way she did. There's a gap, a small one, almost too small to notice, between the moment the fear shows up and the moment your hand moves toward the next tab, the next application, the next refresh. Most of us don't even notice that gap exists. We feel the fear, and the tab is already open before we've consciously decided anything. But the gap is there. It's just quiet, and it's fast, and almost nothing in your day is built to help you notice it. That gap is not nothing. It's the only place in this entire loop where anything resembling choice actually lives. Not because noticing it fixes the economy or brings back the old predictable yes, or makes credential inflation disappear. It doesn't do any of that. But it's the difference between motion that happens to you and motion you're actually choosing. And that difference, small as it sounds, is the only real foothold anyone has inside a system built to keep you checking. Think about Maya's 14 tabs again, and you can almost see where that gap would sit. A half second after the thought, I need one more skill, and before her hand reaches for the trackpad. Think about David, staring at a new listing before he's even finished his notice period. Think about Priya, refreshing a career site instead of sitting with the fact that the role she trained for might not open the way she was told it would. None of them are doing anything wrong. They're all just moving too fast through the one moment that might actually help them, the moment where the choice still belongs to them. So the next time you feel that pull toward one more tab, one more application, one more refresh, the goal isn't to shame yourself out of it. And it isn't to force yourself to stop through sheer willpower either. Both of those treat this like a character problem. It was never a character problem. It's just worth knowing the next time you feel that specific itch, that there's a half-second gap sitting right there before your hand moves, and that half second might be the most honest moment you get all day. So here's where that leaves us. 3 things worth carrying with you. First, the truth of it. Tab hoarding, job hopping, doomjobbing at midnight. Even Priya refreshing a job board for a role that quietly stopped existing in its old shape. They're not separate problems, and they're not proof that anything is wrong with you specifically. They're the same brain, running the same ancient search for a reliable yes, in an economy that stopped handing those out on schedule. Second, what that actually means for you. The itch you feel to open one more tab, send one more application, check one more board, that itch isn't evidence you're behind. It's evidence the system trained you, the same way it trains everyone, to mistake motion for progress. Once you can see that gap, the half second before your hand moves, you don't have to fix the whole economy to use it. You just have to notice it's there. And third, the part that actually stays with you after this video ends. A generation was raised on the promise that trying harder always used to work. And they're trying harder than almost any generation before them. Later nights, more tabs, more applications, more certificates, and it is not working, not the way they were told it would. That's not a character flaw. That's not weakness. That's just what happens when the deal quietly changes and nobody sends on notice. So here's the question worth sitting with, and I'd genuinely like to know the answer. Which one of these is you right now? The tab hoarder, the job hopper, or the doomjobber? Tell me in the comments. You might be surprised how many people reply saying the same thing. Because maybe the point was never to try harder. Maybe it was just to notice for half a second before you open the next tab.